let's get started. Let's get started on what we're talking about today. Okay, so just as an aside, when you're in ACDC, like I said about, we talked a little bit. I can't really dive too much into them just because they're in themselves, they're their own modes. But manage mode is for categorization and navigation. Develop mode is for editing raw files, raw images, non-destructively. And edit mode, which is portions of what we're going to be talking about today, is for creating compositions and editing your images. And it can be non-destructive and it can be destructive. In our first video on edit mode, we talked about sort of some of the non-destructive abilities of edit mode. And now we're going to talk about how you can change your photos in edit mode. And you can do so much with filters that you can't do with adjustment layers. So we'll talk about that. Anyway, so let's dive in. Let's just go right into it. Yeah, let's open up an image here. Let's open up this guy right here. So I'm going to click on my image right here, and I'll just click on edit mode, and it's going to pop in. And so let me grab my filter menu back on the left-hand side. So I've sort of customized my layout, and this layout was because we were talking about adjustment layers, which are sort of located on the right-hand side in a previous video. So we talked about that last month, but we're actually going to open up our filter menu, which is located on the left, which is what we're going to be talking about today. And we'll unhide that guy. There we go. So our filter menu is what we're going to be talking about in addition to talking about actions today. So filters are different. So basically when you go into edit mode, okay, which is the mode we're in right now, there's two ways to edit the appearance of your image. The way that we talked about last time in our first edit mode video was about using layers, masking, adjustment layers, and these things are all essentially non-destructive tools that when you go to save your image, right, that you created in edit mode as an ACDC file, similar to how you would create, like a Photoshop file if you were using Photoshop, or a proprietary file type for camera one or whatever. However you decide to edit your photos, they all have a way of basically maintaining their non-destructiveness. So in ACDC, in Ultimate, the way that we do that is by editing our image and then navigating over to File and saving as a copy of it as an ACDC file format. So, and what this does in regards to edit mode with adjustment layers is it will save all that information. So if you had made a couple levels changes and light EQ changes and all these things, it'll maintain those, it will be aware of those, so that when you open up that ACDC file in the future on ACDC Ultimate, it will read those things, it will recognize it, and it will present to you the last saved changes that you had. So now, when we're working with filters, filters are when you change a photo using any of these filters that appear on the left-hand side here, you are making destructive changes to your image in that it's basically saving down that information. It is flattening the file with that information. There's several ways to sort of ultimately get around the aspect of the non-destructive, like you can make this process somewhat non-destructive, and we're going to be talking about that today. But so just to sort of set the stage for what we're going to be talking about in regards to filters, it's really important to understand the differences between them and adjustment layers. So let's just talk about that right now. Let's sort of like get a feel for that. Let's right off the bat, like if we make a an adjustment layer change, again, these are things that we talked about in the past workshop. But say I just do something simple like make a levels change to this image, right? So I click on the levels button, which is just down in the adjustment layers section, and it will pop up, like I said, with this sort of layer that appears in the layer panel, and it will tell me like, oh, well, when I go to change this information, maybe I take the shadows and I pull them into the midtones, and maybe I take the highlights and I pull them into the midtones. When I go to save this image, so I'll go over to File, Save As. I'm going to save this in the same folder. I'm just going to call it Great Wall Non-Destructive. And I'll remember it as an ACDC file format. So we'll click Save. It's going to save this. And so what's important about this is when I go to open up this image in the future, it will be remembered as a non-destructive image. So let's navigate away. We'll go back to manage mode. Oh, we were in we clicked on another image. We were in there for a while, making some changes to this image. And, 2 weeks later, we find ourselves back in this same folder, and we clicked on oh, there it is. There's our Great Wall non-destructive ACDC file with the file type listed in the top right-hand corner in manage mode. Well, if I navigate into that image, well, it's like I said, it will remember that I have that specific levels change with that specific amount of the shadows moved into the midtones, and likewise with the highlights. Okay, so we get that. We get that these adjustment layers are non-destructive, Adam, but we're not working with those today. We're working with filters. So how do I go about understanding how these work? How do filters work in relation to these layers? And so let's illustrate a change that we can make using filters. So let's, for the purpose of this, we're still working within this ACDC file. Let's just get rid of this levels change. So we're just going to delete this layer using the delete button that's just beneath the adjustment layers panel. Great, goes back to my fundamentally the original image I had. Let's go about, making a filters change. And just a reminder, if you have any questions, I just see some stuff popping up in chat. Just please put it in Q&A. It's easier to keep track of. Chat's filled with a lot of different things. So if I was to make a change to this, let's just say, let's add a vignette to this image, okay? So we're gonna add a vignette, just using the left filter panel. I'm not gonna spend too much time talking about this just because we're gonna get to the actual meat and potatoes of the filter menu. But we're just gonna apply this, okay? And just to understand what's going on, I have this vignette applied, but you'll notice as I just approach the layer panel that's just on the right-hand side here that, oh, it doesn't show that there was anything that came before this. There's no pop-up that shows that it was an adjustment layer or any of these things. No, my layer has been fundamentally changed, permanently. And that's what we describe as a destructive change. So when we're working with filters, one of the benefits that we get out of filters is that they're way more comprehensive. There's elements of them that are more comprehensive. There are elements of them that you don't have to be playing around with masks or anything like that. However, they do have this air of destructibility to them. So we'll illustrate and we'll show you how to sort of work around that as we get into it. But let's answer a couple questions while I'm here. How does ACDC format different from others, JPEG, etc.? Okay, so a JPEG is a flattened file. And what that means is, there's no data that ACDC can read that illustrates, what went on with that file. What was changed from the original file. It doesn't illustrate like, hey, you might have had several layers of information or even photos stacked upon photos. Like ACDC files, and again, I would direct you to our first edit mode workshop because this is all covered in that. But ACDC files themselves contain all of the layers in your image, and that could be several different pictures, right? With a bunch of different adjustment layers, opacity, blending changes, all of this information that is compounding to create your image. So how does it differ from a JPEG? Well, like I said, it contains it's like the difference between looking at a picture and entire like collage that you've created. AC/DC files are like collages versus just looking at a picture like a JPEG or a PNG or a TIFF file or whatever. So, and we'll get into that in a bit greater detail, but that's the gist of it. Working layers versus filters, which creates the largest file? Working with adjustment layers and layers will create a larger file than working with filters. And the reason for that is when you use a filter, like I said, it sort of compresses the file. It creates it takes all the information that you've changed and then it makes that the final file. So that's going to be smaller than having an image that has multiple layers in it. So anyway, so Noel just basically mentioned what I'm going to talk about right now, which is sort of a method to functionally achieve non-destructibility. So I'm going to go back. Let's reopen. I'm just going to undo this vignette. And let's go back to manage mode and open up a different file. Let's just open up this guy right here. So whenever we're working with filters, one of the things that we want to get into the habit of doing, okay, before we click on any of these buttons here, before we interact with this left-hand menu, the thing I want you to get into the habit of doing, and this is very similar for other composition-based editors. Like this is very much a function that we do all the time in something like Photoshop, you know? So what I want you to get the habit of doing is actually duplicating your layer. So when you see your layer here, we've got layer 1 open. It's in our layer panel. Well, I know that I will maintain my original if it's on my layer panel as long as I can make a copy of it. So we'll go down to the duplicate layer button that's just beneath the adjustment layers, all of these tools we sort of talked about in the previous video. And it's going to create a copy of that layer. Now, the only thing that filters care about, right, is your active layer. So when I go to make a vignette or a liquify or levels or a color EQ, any of these things, all it cares about is the active layer that we're working on. So I have this layer 1, copy 1 selected. This is my active layer. You can tell that it is my active layer because it's highlighted. If I had clicked on layer 1, that's now my active layer. Click on layer 1, copy 1, it's my active layer. And so when I go to make a vignette change, which we'll do, same thing we did before, destructively, let's do it somewhat non-destructively, and that we'll add this vignette. Okay, it looks great. We're happy with it. Click done. It's going to apply that vignette. And then now you can see, looking at these sort of thumbnails in the top right-hand corner on our layer panel, that layer 1, copy 1 has the vignette applied, and layer 1 does not. So if I can basically maintain my original layer, I can maintain that while I'm making these edits, while I'm changing things, by going through the process of just duplicating it if I want to make any changes. So as you're working within these files, like, yeah, you can go about, using the back button to undo certain things and changing things. But at a certain point, you will have made so many changes. You will have clicked on so many different buttons that going back and through the history panel is just not going to be feasible. There might be so many changes that you've made that it's just not possible. So by duplicating it, we're maintaining this semblance of a working file. We are working within this. We have a non-destructive element. And keeping in mind, too, that even though we're making filters changes, right? This image right here, layer 1, copy 1, has a filter applied to it, and that cannot be undone. But if we were to save this as an AC/DC file, we can still operate within that layer 1. So we can still open this at any point in the future and go, okay, I know what I did there. I changed that. I added a vignette filter. but I can always see my first as well. Okay, so Noel asked, is it worth making copy layers so that you can apply a filter to a layer but don't destroy the original? And like, totally, you just completely, mentioned my whole point here. And so I guess for Noel's question is, I think that if you're working within more complicated files, and maybe you've got a couple of filters going from the filter menu, and maybe you've got a couple adjustment layers and like some blending and all these things going where you've a really complicated file, I would say that if you're ever making a filter change, right? Yeah, get in there, duplicate your file. Okay, so now let's start talking about and sort of shifting our focus away from the destructibility and all these things and actually sort of generating our focus back to the filter menu itself. Because for some of you, you say, well, great, Adam, I mean, I don't need to be making these complicated files. I just want to make like one quick change to my image or whatever, and this is the way I want to do it. And so the filter menu, you might never interact with a mask in your life. You might only work within the filter menu. And all of these things are really useful tools. So let's just, let's go through and hide some of these actually. So the filter menu itself is just appears on the left-hand side right here. You can, with like any of the sort of tabs within ACDC, you can pull it off and place it wherever you like. I like to keep it on that left-hand side though. And if you ever lose it, you can go over to, I believe, panes and just click the filter menu, which is F2 in this case, to sort of pop up the menu there. So if you ever click X or something like that, or you hide it and you don't know where it is, it's easy to get back by using that. And then it will reallocate to the last space you had. So filter menus, there's a variety of different tools that are within it. We're going to be talking about a select few, some of the ones that I use more regularly, and you can sort of go about exploring the tool overall. But let's talk about the sections first. So there's a couple in repair. One is red eye reduction. One is the repair tool, which allows you to like make clones and sort of fixes and repairs to your image. The next is skin tune, and then chromatic aberration. So all of these are focusing on elements of your image that you want to, again, repair. Red eye reduction, really just quickly changing the sort of over appearance of red eye in your image, versus like chromatic aberration, which is you zooming in on your image and you notice there's some like green or cyan or pink hues on the edges of sort of like where there should be contrast. It's easy to go in and remove those things. The next section would be add, which is, again, it's simple. It's like adding text or watermarks or borders or vignettes like we did earlier. Some special effects, tilt and grain. So these are sort of on top of what would be normal in regards to a workflow process. These are things that you would add on top of it. In terms of most commonly used, I think right now, right off the bat, like vignette is probably one of the most commonly used additions to your images. Moving on to geometry. So geometry is pretty simple. It's just changing the shape of your image, whether it be through rotations or flipping it or cropping it, and then various perspective changes. It also has the ability to sort of fundamentally resize your image and then apply different lens corrections based on which lens profile you have. So there's information in there. Again, most often you'll probably be something like crop. These are a little on the, not as often used. Maybe you'll be doing a bit of distortion correction based on, I don't know, some fishbowling or something like that occurs in your image. But eyes have a tendency to focus less on geometry and more on exposure, lighting, color, and occasionally detail. So we'll be talking about these a bit more. And I'm going to open them up. And so I guess the ones that I'd really like to focus on specifically is levels. We'll probably talk about light EQ, dehaze, and then color balance, and we might talk a little bit about clarity as well. So Noel is asked, does the resize add pixels or just spread them? So ACDC Ultimate 2019 is not a vector editing software. It's a bitmap. So it works with bitmap images, which, like we talked about, are like JPEGs, PNGs, TIFFs, these file types that cannot be made larger without reducing the quality of the image. And this is just a universal across the board. So if I was to go into something like, I believe it was in geometry, and or where did I have it here? When I go into resize, it's will give me the ability to increase the width and height in this image. But it's really important to note that that's not a, whenever you're dealing with photography in general, that's generally not a good idea. You should be downsizing your image, not upsizing your image, because there will be pixelation that will occur. So pixelation meaning that like elements of your image that should have clarity to them begin to blur. And there's very few ways to increase images, and this is across the board for photo editors, increase the size of images while maintaining some semblance of clarity or contrast in your image. The bigger you blow up your image, the more it becomes pixelated, versus you can downsize more easily. So to answer your question, does the resize add pixels or just spread them? It would spread them. It's not going to suggest like new pixels for the locations where you've increased the size of your image. It's not that smart. But yeah, like I said, that is a rarity. Like I know that there are some programs that do add pixels to images based on, it can sort of like suggest pixels using AI, but no, it's not really that, not really the way it is intended to be used. So it is generally for downsizing images or adjusting the sort of aspect ratio. Okay, so let's start talking about our first one, our first sort of main filter that I'd like to cover, and that is levels. So I'm going to go into a different image. I don't want to do any levels changes on this image. So let's do that. I'm going to cancel out of this image. And I will find another one. Let's go into this image right here. So what I did basically is I just navigated back to my manage mode by canceling out of my image. So manage mode is like the default mode in ACDC. Again, like this is how you navigate. This is how you begin the categorization process of finding your files. And so whenever we go from edit mode, and it'll always take us back to this mode so we can go about sort of, in this case, navigating and finding our files. So it has a folder directory on the left here, and then I'm just going to bring up this muck image right here that I titled because I want to make some levels changes to this image. What about resizing before cropping? Could that improve image quality? So you sized your image down and then you cropped. It's not going to improve or reduce the image quality. It's just going to maintain the image quality. There's no functional change there. You're just making your image smaller and then cropping a section of it. So yeah, it leaves it the same as when you went through the process of resizing. So I opened up my image here. What is my workflow? What is my process? Again, it is to duplicate my image. So I'm going to click on my layer 1. I'm going to duplicate my layer. I have a secondary copy of my layer, so I know that I have that if I need it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up on my filter menu the levels change right here. So I'm going to go into levels. When I do so, it's going to basically bring me into this sort of secondary area of the software within edit mode, which is the levels section. So I can make all my changes or whatever within this mode and then click done, and then it will apply them and bring them back to that area where I had my layer panel and my filters. So, pardon me, if I'm looking at my image here and I want to make some levels changes to this, I want to adjust the reds in this image, and I also want to adjust the luminance in this image. And I'm going to do these basically individually. But let's just sort of look at a little bit of the layout of the land here in regards to what filters looks like. We'll talk about the sections. So at first it might seem a little bit complicated, but there's only basically three things going on here. One is the tool itself, and you'll notice that we have the tool is right here, where it gives us the ability to interact with the specific channel in this case, which is the the brightness, the luminance. And then it gives me the shadows, the midtones, and the highlights, which we're going to be adjusting shortly. And then it gives us some various methods of changing these. You can adjust them incrementally, or you can suggest blacks, midtones, and highlights, and it will adjust them accordingly. Or you can apply auto, adjust contrast, color and contrast, and color and brightness. Personally, for me, I like just adjusting the actual tabs themselves by pulling these elements sort of further in. I find that to be the most incrementally valuable tool. It's visually, it's helpful for me. It's my sort of specific workflow. So that's the tool itself. Just above the tool is a preset. So if you're like, hey, like maybe this section where I've reduced this highlights, and I've reduced these, I've reduced the shadows, or sorry, I've moved the shadows into the midtones. Maybe I want to save this preset because I plan on using this in other images. And this might be pretty useful if you, have a tendency to take a lot of photos within similar light circumstances. So you can go about like, oh, I don't have to adjust, these individual tabs when I go about editing my images. It just allows me to save a preset as I go. So let's do it. Let's actually save a preset because this is fine for what I'm working with. So I just click on the Save Preset button, and then it'll just prompt me to basically tell me what this is, which in this case, this would be my preset for, forest shadows or something like that. So I'd hit OK, and then it would pop up within my presets here and lists it in the dropdown. So I could select that at any point if I wanted to mimic this shadows at 21, midtones at 1, and highlights at 232. So it'll remember these elements for me. So the actual, whenever you go into any filter, be it levels or dehaze or color or vignette or whatever we're talking about, they will always exist in this sort of left section just right here. But there's some other things going on within this mode, and that is the brush gradient tool section and then pixel targeting section. So we're going to talk about these as we go through, but without like bombarding us with a bunch of information, let's just sort of focus on the brush section for now. But I like my luminance changes to this image. I want them to be global. I want them to affect the whole image like we have here. I want them to be at this 21:1:232 that I have going on in this, in terms of my this luminance channel. So what I'm going to do is, because I'm happy with these, I'm going to click done and apply the changes. So you'll notice if I look over to my layer 1 copy 1, it has a very different looking thumbnail than that of my layer 1, and that's because I've made these level changes. So if I go about hiding that, it will illustrate to me that, yeah, Adam, these are pretty different looking images. That's because you've made that levels change. Noel asked, is there a shortcut key to duplicate like Control D? I do believe there is. Now let's find out what it is. Keyboard shortcut guide. I always forget these. I've been using AC/DC for so long that I often don't use the shortcuts. I think it might actually just be Control D, but we'll see. Control K, Alt D. Let's just try it. It might be Control or Alt D. There, it cannot be developed. Normally it says it right next to it here. Yeah, that would not be good. That's not what we want to do. Where is it? I should be able to find this pretty quickly. Oh, I know this. Control Alt A duplicates the selected layer. Let's try that. Control Alt A, duplicate it. There you go. So yeah, Control Alt A duplicates a selected layer. Anyway, back to layer 1, copy 1. So we weren't quite finished this image. We wanted to make one other change to it. So I want to navigate to layer 1, copy 1. I'll go back into levels. And this time I want to specifically change a brushed on element of my image to the red field. So what I'm going to do just to illustrate this right off the bat is I'm going to move my channel to the red channel. Like I said, we're just back in levels here. And I'm going to reduce the red channel. But I mentioned earlier, and you'll see that, oh, hey, well, Adam, that's quite a bit more green. You're reducing the sort of dark reds. So but that looks really beautiful in here, but I want to maintain some of that red grittiness on the ground here. So I've got this channel change, but I only want it to affect the top portion of my image. So there's a couple ways to do that, because right now this interaction is applying to the whole image. So the first way we could do that is, okay, well, we've got my, our channel changed, it looks good, but where do I want to apply that? So I can click the brush tool itself, and the brush tool basically enables me to brush on whatever the corresponding changes are that we have illustrated underneath them. So if I have my brush tool active, I can just paint on sections of my image, and you can see that now that's changing the sort of background of my image here. And you can see which elements you've painted on by just showing your brush strokes by clicking this little button right here. So now that I have that active, I'm showing my brush strokes, you can see that those areas of my image appear far more green than the ones below it. And this is how we can use the brush tool to sort of mimic mimic the general channel changes, but in the areas that we want, the areas that we're selecting. So, but there's way cooler tools going on. There's really neat things we can do with the brush tool that sort of enable us to make even more precise selections. So I'm just going to go about just showing my brush strokes just so I can quickly erase them. And we're going to remake this selection a bit better and make it a much more refined selection. So, okay. Now, under your brush tool, you'll notice a couple different controls. The first control itself is just the size of the brush. So if you'll notice that our brush size here is much smaller than our brush size here. And that's because of the brush nib width. So we can always change our brush size, and we can always change the feathering as well. Now what feathering is it's the gradation between basically where you press and it basically gives it a nice edge where it's softer around the edge versus harder around the edge. So feathering gives you gradation between the center of your click, your nib here, and the very outside of the effect. So that second one is going to be quite a bit more aggressive than the first one because the feathering has been reduced to 0. I'm going to get rid of these again. And then the next section, which is probably the most important section in regards to making levels changes or making any brush changes at all, is the smart brushing tool, which we're going to turn on for this. Smart brushing is really cool and unique. Smart brushing allows you to select brightness, color, or a mixture or combination of two, and it will, based on where you've selected in your image, it will make suggestions to add to that selection based on the radius of the nib in relation to the colors and brightnesses. So that probably doesn't make any sense. Let's show you what it means. So I'm going to set it to magic, meaning that I want my selections to be acknowledging both light and color. And I'm just going to select portions of my image. And you'll notice that in regards to the background information, it's sort of selecting everything within that same color and brightness that I have in my background. So I'm just going to go about kind of making this selection now. And then we'll stop hiding or rather we'll turn off the brush, showing the brush strokes. And it will sort of change the interaction between, especially down here, where there's more particular detail than if we didn't have this setting turned on. It would be a little bit more aggressive in terms of the line. We'd see the line between the application of this channel and where their brush stroke is. We kind of want to avoid that. So if I just unclick brush strokes now, you can see that this looks very different from, you can see that a green channel has sort of been applied here. Let's make it more aggressive so you can see it even, there we go. The difference between the two based on that brushing. So we'll just finish up our brush here and then select the rest of this area. Yeah, so when you're brushing in AC/DC, I'm just clicking and holding down the button, so my left mouse button. But interestingly, I can also right-click at any point. So, and it removes it from the selection. So in this case, I'm right-clicking, I'm removing it from the selection, or I'm left-clicking it and adding it to the selection. Now, these areas that I'm selecting have a lot of pixel information in them, right? There's a lot of stuff going on here, you know. So it's being very, very, very careful in particular. And you'll notice there's some issues and there's some areas in where we've goofed in regards to the sky and that sort of stuff. And that's just because there's so much information here. But if I was to take a more simple area like this log here that has a more dense amount of that color, you know, it's going to have a much easier time making these selections. But I find, especially when it comes to like trees and things like that, you know, it does an incredible job still of maintaining that sort of green application here. Like you can very, very barely tell that, you know, it might be adding, you know, those channel changes up into these white sections. So it's a very, very good at applying that change to these sort of particular areas. What can we do to illustrate that better too? In this case, I'm just going to hide, show previous. So this was the original versus the green that's been added there. So we've applied a smart brushing, basically, and we've only made that that red channel change to this top portion here, where we can see our brush strokes like that. Tolerance is actually also really important when it comes to smart brushing. Tolerance it allows you to select more, or it's less discriminatory in regards to the pixels of the outlining areas. So if you're picking, you know, this tree, for example, it's going to be more, it will apply as much as it can in terms of those sort of pixels that you're selecting, the lightness and the color. if you increase the tolerance, it'll say like, oh no, all of these colors or these different sort of details around the street. We'll add more of those to the selection. And if you dramatically reduce the tolerance, it will do the opposite of that, where it'll be even more selecting or selective about that sort of particular area. So I generally like to leave it in the center and sort of kind of play with it as I go through. Anyway, so we've made a couple different levels changes to this image, right? And we're actually going to go, let's see, we'll have a look at the original and compare the two. So I'll click done. There we go. And so you'll notice that, okay, so if we're looking at, just because we have it in our layers panel here, we've got the original image, which has a very grainy, almost haziness to it. And then we have the levels change and the increase of the green in the area. And I could have been more, particulate about, I could have spent more time making a selection in regards to that. But I think that's a pretty good display of the fact that we can be really careful with our brush selections. Anyway, so we're going to talk, sort of moving forward, I want to talk about the one of the other things that we had in that mode, which is pixel targeting. So we've talked about the tool itself. We've talked about the sort of brush controls. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go into a different filter to sort of illustrate pixel targeting. So let's do that. Okay. Discard. Okay. Let's go into this image right here. And we'll talk about light EQ, but we'll also talk about pixel targeting. So I'm going to, again, just because I'm going into a new image, and if I was working on this long term, saving it as an ACDC file, I'd want to make a duplicate of my image because I'm working with filters. But in this case, we have an image that has pretty good central focus, but I think even this image doesn't have a vignette on it or anything like that, but I do find that a lot of the detail is lost on the edges of this image. So we can improve this and still maintain that central focus, which is the waterfall and the guy about to jump, right? And this is also within the exposure and lighting tab. So I'm just gonna highlight over here on our filters, and I'm going to go into light EQ with my layer 1, copy 1 selected. So I'll click on light EQ. And light EQ, like the other tool levels, right? It has the tool itself down here. It has the ability to brush or apply gradients. And then it has pixel targeting. So let's open up pixel targeting and sort of illustrate that to begin with. Pixel targeting will inform your changes. So in regards to this image, with pixel targeting open, I have tone bars and color bars. I'm going to leave my tone bars as is, and let's look at the colors here. If I reduce all of these colors to 0, it changes my mask to black. The reason that is because in this case, it's saying that, hey Adam, you want to select 0 oranges, 0 reds, 0 yellows, 0 greens, etc. So by process, if all of these things are set to 0, then there's nothing to change. Versus if I have all these elements set to 100, the target mask is displayed as white, and it would say that, well, hey Adam, if you're selecting all of these colors, well then everything can be selected. So what I'm trying to illustrate here is that the target mask, when it's displayed as white, means that those are the areas of your image that will be changed. When they're displayed as black, those are the areas of your image that will not experience any change and will remain the same. Now, if you recall back to our edit workshop, the first edit workshop that we did, this is exactly functionally identical to the way that the masks work within the layer panel. Totally the same. So in this case, what can I make a selection of? Well, let's just crank the green because there's more greens and oranges than anything else in this image. And we'll see how our target mask changes. Well, now there's the addition of some of the flora on the left-hand side, but let's even bring this up even more. If I increase this turquoise bar, the cyan bar, you'll notice that my my water is now selected down here. If I was to increase blues, some of the waterfall has been selected in my mask. And I bet you anything, if I increase orange, a lot of these craggy sort of rock sections right here will be included as well. There you go. So my target mask with these elements increased is now highlights these sections of the image. So if I was to now, with these pixel targeting selections active, change one of these fields, the light EQ fields, it will be applied to those specific areas of our image. So let's see if we can just do something ridiculously easy to see. Yeah, but not exactly a good change. So I cranked my highlights. Let's reduce our midtones and our shadows. Now I can see that, okay, well, the part of the water here has been sort of, it's blown out. Elements of this rock face, especially right here, it's very visible. These have been blown out as well because that's aware of the target mask that we're using. Now, if all of these, again, were set to 0, right, there would be functionally no change to my image. Notice that my image is now reverted back to its default state because no targets are selected within the mask. Or, alternatively, set these to 100, and I'm pretty sure this will look awful. Yeah, there you go. So you set all of the targeted colors to 100, and then the highlights are set to 100, and it blows out everything within the selected fields. Let's just reset this. There we go. So the way that this can be used, actually, here, let's navigate to an image where it's very clear. I'll go back to manage mode and select an image which has a clear color, like this image of the coastline here. If we were to navigate back to light EQ, like what is the predominant color in this image? Well, it's surely blue. So if we were to select just blue in this case, we can make a pretty significant change to this section. So if we're selecting, okay, we're selecting cyan and we're selecting blue, we can take down the midtones in that area. We can maybe increase the highlights and dramatically reduce the shadows. And that way you're sort of changing just that section of the image, just those blues. Brad asked, so this is a luminosity mask. It can be viewed as that. Yeah, we have, I mean, in edit mode, there's also ways to select luminosity on its own. But it's selecting these specific colors within this range of tones. So in this case, I have, I can reduce all my blacks to 0, all my midtones to 0, and you'll start to see the target mask now change. So it's not selecting the sort of this area of light within my image and making those changes. If I just wanted to select the highlights, it's just this section right here and apply, like a midtones or highlights change to that area. But yeah, in terms of luminosity, yeah, it's looking for specific areas of light. And it's also able to target specific colors and then make adjustments or changes to those different fields. So it gives you basically 2 different fields to interact with your image and then adjust it accordingly. But I find this really good. I'll just crank these again. I find this really useful for if you have an image, for example, of like somebody with a dress, or like of a specific color. And also, like, hey, maybe you have like a house that's a certain color or something like that. All of these things can be very good at selecting these elements. But the reason why I bring this up in specifically this image is now you can also use the brush to select on portions of this image. Because in this image, where we have the shadows, midtones, and highlights adjusted accordingly, and we're selecting blues and, cyans and dark blues, well, there's an issue here in that perhaps it's only the ocean I want to change, or perhaps it's only the sky I want to change and I want to leave the ocean as is. So if I have a pixel targeting selection, I can compound it with a brush selection. So now I can go in and adjust my nib width and my feathering and just select the sky. So I'm using a couple different tools here. Let's do this. I'm using pixel targeting in correlation with the brush tool in order to better select my image here. So I know that when I go to make, or rather unclick these brush strokes, I know that it is only the sky that is experiencing these changes. But with pixel targeting, this is a really good way of selecting, in this case, just the sky, just the blue areas of my image, the cyans and the blues, but then also further refining it so that it doesn't impact the other areas that are blue in my image. If I have two people with purple dresses and I want to select just one of those purple dresses, then this is how I would do so. And then I can adjust accordingly, so those areas. So that would be how I would use pixel targeting and brush controls in order to get this change. I guess while we're here in LightEQ and we're talking about using pixel targeting, we can also use pixel targeting in coordination with gradient controls as well. So yes, so Brad just asked, the target mask doesn't change. Yeah, the target mask doesn't change because in the pixel targeting element of the tool, which is on the right-hand side here, nothing has changed. It's only your brush selection that's changed. So in this case, these two elements of the tool don't talk to each other, but the actual effect does, if that makes any sense. That's actually a really good suggestion for a feature, though, because I feel like if you were also making brush selections, and then it should also be respected within the mask. But anyway, for the developers to decide. So I have my gradient tool selected here, which is right next to the brush here. And I have linear gradient. And in order to illustrate this, I can show the gradient mask. So if I move this, you'll notice that it is now selecting more of the blue along the ocean here, but I can control the area where this is selected by lifting these gradient controls. So this enables me to sort of functionally do the same effect of that brush, but have a more broad ability to change these areas. So again, it is respecting these pixel targeting suggestions. So it's seeing the cyan, it's seeing the blue, but it's also only applying it to the area where the gradient is applied. So in this case, it's the red area that was up here that was shown earlier. That's where the shadows, midtones, and highlights are being applied. Cool. Let's take a look at some of these. Yeah, okay. So let's get back to sort of making some pretty powerful changes to some of our images. So I did want to change the LightEQ within the that sort of diving photo I had earlier, but I just wanted to take a moment to stop and sort of explain, okay, so while we're working within filters, right, we understand that the tool itself is here. We understand that we can make selections here by using brush and gradients. And we can sort of further refine our selections by using pixel targeting. So it's like 1, 2, 3, make the changes, select the areas that you want to have changed, and then further refine via pixel targeting. So I'm going to navigate back to manage mode. I'll discard these as I don't need them. And let's go to this dive image. And let's start to sort of use these elements in coordination with one another. Okay, so here's our first, here's our dive image. Let's go and make a duplication. And then let's go into LightEQ on that tool on the side. And what I'd like to do is, you'll notice that in LightEQ, we have it currently set to the basic section, which just gives us shadow, midtones, and highlights. I want to move into the advanced section. There's a couple different tools within LightEQ. One is just like a single sliding bar. The basic one is the shadows, midtones, and highlights, which I often use. It's sort of like a really good one-stop shop for that sort of thing. But then there's also standard, which gives you access to a variety of different sort of areas of, you know, in this case, this would be like shadows, midtone, or sorry, rather blacks, shadows, midtones, highlights, and whites. But I like using advanced because it has this double click function where you can suggest a change. So while I'm in advanced, the fourth on the tool here, if I just, you'll notice that it says right here, just down the bottom, you can drag or double click on an image to begin adjusting. So if I wanted to like pull up areas of my image, I could do so. But auto clicking, just double clicking on area, will give you a suggestion. This suggestion is pretty aggressive. So what you can do is you can sort of adjust elements of it by pulling them down, selecting on certain areas of the image. But I can work with this. I actually really like this double click functionality. So what I'm going to do is, now that I've double clicked, I'm actually going to look over on this side and I'm going to sort of reduce some of these areas. You notice that some of these areas are clipped, like these highlights right here are clipped. So I'm going to pull them down. I'm also going to pull this guy down slightly and raise some sections. So before, there was no clarity in this section, like on the left and right, where it was just too dark to see. Now I'm sort of starting to see there's highlights in here that we can sort of pay attention to, and it's, again, we're driving the focus in the center of our image, but I'm still going to dramatically decrease and then increase some of these elements, and sort of working with this auto selection that we have. So I think right there is where I want to stop. It's really noticeable in here and right here, where we've gained so much information and dramatically improved, I think, our image, but we still want to talk about some of these elements here, because this is the highlights in the water, sort of where you can see it's impacted negatively. So we're going to work with this anyway. So now that I have that selection made, I'm going to hit done, and we'll make a second change to this. And the second change that I think I want to do is, well, I'd like to get this more blue in appearance down here in this sort of the water area. But I also want to reduce, or maybe work with the let's see, your color, the white balance, to change that a little bit. So we're going to white balance first, and we're also going to add a vignette to this image, I think. So we'll go through, let's reduce the temperature, sort of cooling it down a little bit right there. Keeping in mind too that whenever we make a change, so say we wanted to dramatically cool this image down, we could also do so with the inclusion of an opacity change or a blend mode change. So this takes this temperature change, which is maximum cooling, it's basically reduced it to 100, and we can slowly sort of make more gradiated change with the opacity tool. So you can sort of use these in combination with each other to sort of get a good result. And I think I would like to focus more on the areas of the water here as a sort of main selection. So I'm just going to use the brushing tool, sort of brush on these areas. So I've cooled that part of my image down. I'll hit done. And then lastly, I will add a vignette by going to the add section and just adding a really, really slight one. Because again, we don't want to take out too much information in here like we had when we started the file. The horizontal and vertical is fine. So we'll just do that and reduce the opacity slightly. And right there, I think. So we'll compare the beginning and the end here. So again, so we can see the detail in the section now, but we're not as worried about the quality of the image, especially when it comes to this area right here. So we'll just, again, you can sort of see the difference between the two. We've changed the sort of almost the perspective of the image, but we made the water more attractive in addition to gained a lot of light in the middle of our image here. And we did so by using the brush tool. We did so by changing light EQ, using that automatic function within it, and just sort of slightly reducing it in that. Let's focus on a different tool because we've talked about light EQ a little bit within the past couple examples. I'd like to turn now and talk a bit more about dehaze. So we've been focusing on exposure and geometry. We touched a little bit in regards to vignettes. Yeah, let's jump over to dehaze. So I'm going to get rid of this image here. Dehaze is a really cool tool. So dehaze is designed to reduce particulate detail in the foreground specifically, but in basically almost as if there's like water in the air, like a hazy sort of image. So with this particular image, right, you can see that the foreground is quite hazy right here, where you can see the sort of grain of the sun being met with the water in the air. And you can even see it's like a very dewy looking image. But we can sort of fundamentally change the way that that looks by using dehaze. Dehaze is sort of like a one-stop slider in that it has this one field in it. But as you increase it, you can see that, you know, areas of your image, like right here, for example, become highly, like way more clear. So this is sort of like functioning like a levels midtone change in addition to almost like a clarity change in one stop. But what I think I want to do is try to use this in coordination with pixel targeting to be a bit more careful about where this effect is applied. So if I was to drive in the greens and definitely pull up the cyans, you can see that now that's really starting to affect in here. Actually, you know what, we could probably even pull up the yellows a bit right here. And you can see the comparison. It's especially effective right in this area where the sort of grainy detail of this the sky here, or the sort of the open area here. And I'll just further increase the dehaze slider. One of the other things I'd like to fix with this image is you'll notice that there's a lot of reds in and around the outside of it. It's kind of has this maroon appearance to it, and we can easily get rid of that. So I'm going to do so. We'll click done on our image here. And let's go in and do a white balance change. And what we'll want to do is get the opposite effect of this magenta. So if we can do pixel targeting and maybe suggest, hey, I want to focus on, yeah, exactly, that element of our image. There we go. So you're starting to see you can take out a lot of that pinky sort. Wow, it's incredible how much that changes actually. It's by sort of flipping the tint here in this case, you can select those elements out. Actually, one thing I might even do with this image too, let me just show. We might even try using color balance in here as well to sort of take these colors and move them from that sort of burgundy color that they are right now to moving them maybe closer to a blue. But I'm just going to hit done for right now because we've talked about the dehaze function a little bit. But again, you'll notice as I'm going through these filters, a lot of these are very similar in terms of their function. You know, like the way that they're set up is quite similar. So what I'm trying to get across in this case is no matter which filter you're in, the functionality is very similar. The same pixel targeting interactions occur for the most part. For the brushes, the gradients, all of these functions work very, very similar. It's just the tool itself that actually changes. So once you're familiar with pixel targeting and once you're familiar with brushing, the tool itself is really the central focus, and there's sort of a tool for each one. One thing I do want to get that sort of side sort of fixed on this image, so I want to try a secondary thing, which is I think what we want to do is we want to go into color balance. I could be color EQ. Oh, it is color EQ. Okay. Unless, yeah, let's try this. I just want to have a gut instinct that I can get rid of this purple appearance that's on the outside. If I go back into pixel targeting and select the edges, I believe I should be able to go into hue and reduce the saturation. Hey, there we go. Yeah, that would be where I'd stop with that. But yeah, in this case, you're reducing the saturation, trying to get them closer to that sort of gray that appears right here and the green that appears right here. Yeah, anyway, before we start talking about actions, Brian asked a question. Does the duplicate layer impact the entire work? Is it still overlaid? Oh, speaking of which, I actually forgot to duplicate this layer as we were going through. I've been so good so far, and now I've lost all my work. Does the duplicate layer impact the entire work? Is it still overlaid? So the point about filters is that whenever you make a filter, you're compressing the image, right? You're like merging the image down. So you'll notice that I made a bunch of different filters to this image, and I'm still just presented with this layer one, right? Which means that as I've gone through, I have saved over those older filters. And that's why I guess I'm a proponent of and a believer of using duplicating your starting image. Even as you go through, you can duplicate each individual filters, right? Like you can make, like, okay, well now I've made this filter, I'm going to duplicate this image and I'll apply a secondary filter to it. And then so when you go to save as an AC/DC file, you can sort of maintain the semblance of non-destructibility. Again, filters aren't, they're destructive tools. You get slightly more sophistication in regards to these tools, but they don't work the same way adjustment layers do. They don't have the sliders, the ability to functionally change them, at any point. But working within the constraints of that, I do believe that there's the ability to sort of replicate a non-destructive functionality. So I hope that answers your question. Anyway, before we close up, because we're already an hour into this, amazingly, I want to talk about actions. Actions are quite simple, so it's not going to take too much time to talk about them, but they're an extremely powerful tool. So let's do that. I'm going to navigate to a different image, and I think that I've talked about actions quite a bit in the past couple of years, so I think we can give a pretty succinct description of this. I'm going to open up a different image, doesn't matter which, and let's open up the Actions browser. So actions are, let's explain what it is. First of all, actions are a sort of a package of pre-recorded edits you've made to an image that you can then play on other images. So you can select an entire collection of images on your computer, excuse me. So say you select, like, I don't know, 100 wedding photos, and you want each of those wedding photos to appear in like a sepia tone with the levels adjusted. Well, Actions gives you the ability to do exactly that, and then it will like play that change on those images and present you copies, or overwrite the files if you've asked it to, or place them in a new like folder. And you could even change it, save it as a different file type. So you could save it maybe as a TIFF for your client that wants a higher resolution file or something, So let's show you how to do that. Excuse me. Actions are always located up at the top where it says Toggle Actions Browser. So I'm going to pop this up, and you can see that I've already recorded an action here. Let's see if I go over to favorites. Is there anyone in here? I think I might have restarted. Yeah, there we go. So when you open up your Actions browser, you've got this sort of drop-down bar, and it enables, if you've just installed the product, it comes with a set of like custom actions that are, brand new. And you can sort of navigate to those different categories using this category drop-down bar. So the category that I have active right now is Quick Retouch. So if I was to click on dark midtones, the preview that's being displayed on the right-hand side is showing me what that would look like if I play that on my image. So if I then play the dark midtones, there it is. It changes my image completely based on what the action was. If I go to dodge and burn, it would show a different one. So it shows you a preview of what the action is displayed on the left-hand side. And for some of these too, if there's any steps in regards to the action, so if you've created an action using these adjustment layers, it will list all those adjustment layers on the side here. But because we're talking about filters today, and we're talking about, again, sort of compressing all of the changes into one image, there's not going to be any steps. So we'll just keep it simple for today. But so the category allows you to change the category. You can add a new category, which we're going to do because we're going to save a new, we're going to make a new action today. So let's add a new category. We'll call this, let's call it, what did I want to change to our image? Let's change, let's do a pixel targeting blue change. So we'll go blue pixel target, and I'll hit OK. So if I wanted to add a bunch of different actions to this category, I could. So it's just going to create that action, and it will add it right there. And you can go about deleting action categories from here as well. But before I talk too much more about exporting and playing all these things, let's actually physically make an action. Because you're like, hey, great, I know where to play these actions, I know how to navigate to these actions, but I don't actually know how they're created. And it's quite simple. So let's go navigate back to our, let's do this image right here. Navigate to my mountain image, go edit, and let's start recording an action. So to create an action, to start an action, one has to go to the top here and select the record button. So record new action. So I'm going to click that. And you'll notice as I'm recording my action, the steps are listed right here. So as we go and add changes to this, it's going to functionally change my steps involved. And like I said before, if I was using the adjustment layers, if I was working within the layer panel, right, it will remember those aspects of the change. So if I was to duplicate my image, it would then list duplicate layer, and then that would be a part of the steps that was listed on the right-hand side next to the preview section. Okay, cool. So we're editing, we're recording, awesome. We want to make a probably a pixel targeting selection to this, adjusting the blues. So let's go into color EQ. So, and let's click pixel targeting. And you'll notice as I'm making these changes, the actual recording window itself disappeared, but you'll notice that down in the right-hand corner here, it still lists recording. So that's how we know that we're still making changes. So I'm going to go over my targeted colors. I'm going to make sure I'm only selecting blues represented in my mask. I want to, let's see, decrease the vibrance. And, or actually, let me see if I can change these. Let's maybe change the hue of them. So right now they're very, if we go blue, you can kind of change them to a more cyan color. And we'll adjust the saturation. Yeah, maybe pull the saturation down a bit. And decrease the vibrance. So we're getting more gray and less blue in this section. And we want this to be applied as a, no, maybe I want to apply it the whole thing. Yeah. Let's just make a levels change in this image as well to add to our list. And pull up the shadows. And oh yeah, close. There we go. Increase the highlights and hit done. And that's perfect. We don't need to go too much further, but we can keep going in terms of recording. We can record as many things as we want. But when we're done, we've decided that we like our image. I can go click up on the stop recording button and name my action. And let's say blue saturation, actually let's just go saturation reduction. So I just clicked on the stop button. It's going to prompt me to save my action. I wanted to reduce the saturation in regards to the blue, and I'm going to put it within the blue pixel target section or category and click save. So it'll then save my action. And now that the action's saved, I can save this image or cancel out of it. It doesn't matter. The changes themselves no longer matter. So I'm going to navigate away. Go back to manage and discard. And let's go into an image that could similarly be affected by that saturation reduction. So we could go into this image right here and play that action on this image. It will affect the sky, obviously, because it's a blue saturation reduction. So go back to the actions browser and play that on this image. And so the levels change occurs. The blue are not as full. They have a bit more grays in them. It looks a little bit more almost a somber look to it. And so we can show our saved image at any point. But that would essentially be a way of quickly playing this action on one image. One of the neat functions of this Yeah, so Noel asked, yes, absolutely. So Noel asked, can you select, say, 20 images in manage mode and directly apply an action? Well, yeah. So I'm just going to navigate back to, I was showing you sort of how to functionally change within edit mode. But if we were to navigate back to manage mode, and let's just say we select these 4 images or whatever, just for purpose of speed. Those 4 images, and then play this action on them. We would navigate over to the actions section just at the very top here. And we could, once again, we could open up the action browser, or we could just navigate to our blue pixel target. And notice we have our saturation reduction that we just added. And instead of playing it right away, I'm actually going to go into options. And the reason why is because I'd like to maybe change the area in which these images are saved. Maybe I want to change the file output format. So let's just save these as a PNG for the heck of it. And let's place them in a different folder. So Photos 2019, let's go find a folder. So let's put them in February 13th, which I think is the folder that we're in. And let's make a new folder within this folder, and let's call it fixes, I guess. And we'll select fixes, and we'll hit OK, and just make sure that it's selected there. Awesome. And we'll hit OK. And so now that what we're going to do is, instead of renaming within this folder or even overwriting those files entirely, we're placing them within the secondary folder within this collection of images. And we'll hit OK. And now we're going to run that blue pixel target on those 4 photos. Mistakenly, I have to select them there. There we go. So play those. It's going to apply that blue saturation reduction. I'm not sure how effective it's going to be with those images because they're not that blue, but it should change them a little bit. And then when we're done that, we can see those 4 images changed. So ours is making these changes to this image. It's taking its time. There we go. We'll have sort of changed these 4 images. One of the things that's important to remember too is actions they can be exported and imported, which is really kind of cool because it allows you to create your own actions and then provide them to our own community. It should be done now, so I'm going to go check this out. So there you are. So we know that the file has changed because it saved it as a PNG. We have those 4 images with their changes created. So their new file format, they've been affected with the, if I remember correctly, the saturation reduction on the blue, in addition to a slight levels change in the highlights and the shadows. So they're just right in our old folder there, or it's been re-navigated to the top there. But so you can change as many as you want and play those changes, whether or not they'll be black and white or, or what you wanted to do, a sepia change or whatever. And then, like I said, you can go back and just open up a random image here and then save that whole category or individual action. So with this blue pixel target one, for example, I could go, say I want to export this action. So I want to provide this action to a friend, or I wanted to upload it to our own community on acdc.com. Well, then I can go and I can bring up this functionality. So I know that, hey, I can select, blue pixel target, the category, or specifically saturation reduction. So in this case, maybe I want to select just this category that we've created today. And I want to place it on my desktop, sure. And I'll export my package name. I'll just maintain it. It's just, let's just keep it as blue pixel target, but maybe I'll name it Adam afterwards. And then hit OK. And then it's successfully been exported to my desktop. And then I can just hit OK. And then, like I said, if that was somebody else's action or an action had been sent to me, then I can simply quickly navigate over to my desktop and find that specific action. There we go. And there it is, blue pixel target atom, and I can import that one. It remembers which ones you have imported. So if I tried to import that, it would say that it hadn't been successfully installed because we already have it. So there's a lot of ways to sort of go about changing that. But the point is by importing and exporting this, you can provide these to your colleagues or your friends, or you can use our upload function and literally share your actions with as many people as you want. There's some other secondary functions like the ability to rename them, move them to different categories, and then delete them, but those are sort of just as an aside. But to answer your question, Noel, yes, you can apply them to multiple images, but you can also, using manage mode, you can apply them to singular images in edit mode, and you can import and export them to share them with the world. So yeah. That is pretty cool. Maybe what I can do too is while I'm here, while we're talking about actions, I can show you where you can upload your own actions. This is really new. Like, this is something that we only started doing a couple months ago. So it is quite new. Now, if I go, I believe they're on our community page. So if we go over to community on our website, and I believe the Actions Hub is right here. So I'll just leave this here. You guys can have a look at it. And if you want to upload any of your own actions using AC/DC Photo Studio Ultimate, you can do so. One thing I would mention is because actions are a function of both AC/DC Photo Studio Ultimate and AC/DC Photo Studio Professional, they are the ones that you can make on Professional are obviously cross-compatible with Ultimate, but because Ultimate has a layer panel and adjustment layers and all of these things that Professional doesn't have, those actions that are created with Ultimate won't be reversely applicable on Professional. But all of the filter mode ones that we have talked about today are applicable on both, because filters don't use the layer panel in the same way that adjustment layers do. So all of the actions that we create, or sort of rather all of the changes that we talked about, whether it be, the levels adjustment or the light EQ filter or the dehaze filter or the color hue filter, all of these filters that we used are totally compatible with both softwares. It's just when you start using adjustment layers that it only becomes an Ultimate only one. Anyway, guys, that is a lot of information about filters, and it's a lot of information about actions. So I just wanted to thank you and suggest that that's it for today. I'm just going to say right again, though there might be questions. Maybe there's some things I wasn't able to answer. I would love to answer them. I would love to answer them on my email. So if you guys email me at aprice@acdsystems.com, I will get back to you. Again, my name is Adam. This has been the second workshop in the Edit Mode series, or the Intro to AC/DC Photo Studio Ultimate 2019. If you want to see our other workshops in this series, please navigate to the link that I'm about to provide. That goes to our playlist on YouTube with all of the other workshop videos. There's one on manage mode, there's one on develop mode, there's one on the first part of edit mode. In a couple days when this is edited down and finished, I'll also upload it on YouTube so you can see it there as well. So if you want to watch this again, or you thought some of this information was useful, it'll be there for you. It will be on our YouTube. There is a Layers for Dummy tutorial. It is on our YouTube page. Although maybe I should rename it as Layers for Dummies. That's pretty good. Noel, thanks. Adam, I enjoyed it. Thank you so much. Please, shoot me an email. I'll be able to answer any tough questions. Art, you're most welcome. Once again, if you want to learn more specifically about layers, I would navigate you to that edit mode workshop that's on our YouTube channel, the link I just sent. Yeah. Stephen, in regards to larger photo collections, especially when in regards to file management, the actions are, yeah, super useful for sure. If you want to create the most common one I think is just dealing with like wedding photographers. Like if you have similar lighting situations in 100 photos, yeah, it's pretty quick to make like one action and then just apply that to every photo in your collection. Just walk away from the computer, make yourself the coffee and be back and it'll be done. Now that being said, I really, if you do need help with file management, I think the manage mode one, the video or the workshop that we did, it should be able to answer most of the complex questions you have about file management. Yeah, so I would suggest to take a look at that one. It's the first in our series on that link that I sent. But I'm well overdue for also just making a manage sort of suggestions video on our YouTube as well. So that is definitely on my to-do list. Yeah, thank you. Awesome. Noel asked, have they ever going to add a panorama maker as a tool? It is on. It is a definitely something that the developers are aware of and have considered as a tool. I don't know whether or not it's on the docket for a future list, but I know that is something that comes up often. If this is a tool that you really want, send me an email and I'll forward it to the developers. We're a pretty small company. And so when we have, 30, 50, 100 people be like, hey, I'd really like the panorama tool. Well, if we get those emails, we make a panorama tool. So Gary, the link is in the chat. Yeah, Stephen, thank you. Awesome. Ray, I'm glad you understand pixel charting. That's awesome. Yeah. Cool. Well, guys, I'm going to head off. I need lunch like nobody's business. But thank you all. Special thanks to anyone who's not in North America tuning in for this. I really appreciate that, considering you have to wake up at pretty awful hours for it, or maybe stay up late to do so. But yeah, no, I do really appreciate that. That's awesome. Yeah. Anyway, thanks so much. I'm gonna head off tonight. We'll have another workshop next month. Next month is April. Man, time flies. Well, let's probably end up doing that workshop on the 10th, I would think. The 10th of April. Anyway, thanks again. I'm going to head off. Enjoy the rest of your days or nights.